Now, you were in Cassidy for the ABC,
Yeah.
and then you were in
Mm.
a show called A Difficult Woman. These were in the
Hmm.
90s. One of the things that defines Australian television in the 90s is the rise of serious female leads in event television programs. Carolyn Goodall, you were a central part of that progression, that evolution in Australian television, where women came to the fore. They had big, complicated roles in serious shows that were very, very good. And you were part of that. How aware were you when you were making these shows in Australia that something was changing, something important was happening?
Um, I think pretty aware. Um, but I'll tell you why if you're interested, and I'll tell you why it went backwards as well. And that's why we're having what I can sort of only really call a sort of new renaissance, another wave now. Um, the 90s television dominated the broadcast landscape, and women were the ones who watched those programs. And so, therefore, they were looking for women audiences to talk to. And I do think the 90s was very interesting, because if you look in America, you had sort of Working Girl and, Alien. And if you think of, the Ridley Scott movie, and Disclosure that I did with Barry Levinson, which is actually, funnily enough, people are watching all over again. And yes, I think there was just the understanding and belief that, you know, women in big roles were just as much box office draws as men. And in the UK as well, I did a run of those. The Sculptress, Trust was another one. I was the Prime Minister of England in a television series called Me and Mrs. Jones. Um, and I think things started to go backwards a little bit when the landscape started breaking up into niches more. And maybe, I don't know, there was a political angle to it as well. I'm not sure. But I think we're kind of getting back. And women make up more than half the world. And we're very big devourers of entertainment and stories. And we want to see our lives reflected just as much. So I think there's room for everyone. I really do. But yeah, as an actor, it was great. Cassidy with Bill Hunter. That was just so cool. And I remember exhausting because I was in every single scene as well. I mean, that's the other thing, of course, is that when you're making those things, you're really, there isn't a moment to think because you are driving that and you are in every scene. But there was always that little caveat, wasn't there, where, to a certain extent, she had to have a shit love life. She couldn't get everything, but there was always, you were about to be promoted to the World Health Organization board and run it. But meanwhile, something had happened to your best friend. I think, certainly in a difficult woman, my best friend had been raped and killed, and I had to go and find out about that because I was also a pathologist. But my shit love life, oh my God, So you could never completely win. You always had to have a really rough time inside, even though from the outside you appeared to be, kind of warrior woman. So, there's always that stuff going on as well. But it's also the stuff of drama. And it's really fun to do. And those are the days where you did 4-hour miniseries or 6-hour miniseries, and they cut them up and they put them on, over 3 nights or something on the ABC, and everybody kind of looked at the ratings. And certainly from an Australian point of view, hoped that it would sell around the world, because that has always been our issue with Australia, is that we're English language, but so dominated by the Americans and also by the other English-speaking industry, which is the UK, and trying to find an Australian identity and is always been the challenge, which is why we need to have Film Australia, and we need to have support. And it's not just enough to be able to export Australian actors who are bloody amazing and have dominated the world. We don't necessarily want to be a backlot for, the American studios and all put on American accents, which is what we tend to do regardless. Anyway,
you've done it.
To unpack in all of that.
Well, listen, just in parentheses, you keep saying we. Do you consider yourself an Australian?
Yeah, I'm more Australian than anything. But I know everyone refuses to accept that, but I am. But I'm actually a naturalized American now too, so I've just voted. And I was born in the UK, so I'm a bit global.
You're always, of course, and will always be asked about Schindler's List, because it's a historic film and it had a measurable impact on culture. 27 years, it is a classic film, and you had a major part in it. You've spoken at length about the experience of making the film with Spielberg and how it was a masterclass for you and so on. I'm very interested to know, how has your relationship with the film changed and evolved since you made it?
That's a really interesting conversation. An interesting question. I think it's deepened. But I think also there are episodes in your life that stay with you always, because people always ask about it. And I always, on one level, I'm such a small part of it, but I just feel so kind of overwhelmed that people still remember me in it and everything. But I saw it again at the Tribeca Film Festival 2 years ago. It was 25 years, and I had not seen it on the big screen since we were at the premiere in Washington. And God, Bill Clinton was sitting behind me, and I had Steven Spielberg in front of me. And I hadn't seen it since. I'd seen it on sort of at home. I remember the night Heath Ledger died, and he'd been working with my husband, and he was a terribly good friend. And it happened to be on at 2:00 in the morning, and I was just sitting there so shell-shocked, and I just remember watching it and tears falling down my face. But seeing this huge film on the big screen, the relationship I had with it was that it is a bloody masterpiece. It's extraordinary, and it is so moving. And to see it in its entirety from far away, 25 years later, and see it still living and being so resonant, and in a way growing in stature, if that's possible. And whereas before I saw it more in terms, I guess, of the story and the memory of the people that I worked with, because of course you're looking at people who you've had dinner with and who you've spent time with, and so you always have that mix when you're watching a film of the personal relationship you have to the mechanics of the making of the film and the actual end product, the end story. And this time, of course, it really was just about the film, and I was blown away. And I think we all felt that, and we went on the stage afterwards and we did this big Q&A, and so many of the people in that audience were survivors, so it meant so much to them as well. And it just was a huge emotional experience. But I think we all felt it on the stage there, that just to be incredibly moved that we'd been a part of it, and also slightly shell-shocked at the same time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because the film's power is undiminished. it also underlies the fact that films, okay, once they're shot, they're locked away, and that's the final cut, and that's it, that's the film. It's a living thing. It's an organic entity that changes value over time. We all know that films date. Some films become even more relevant, which leads me to my next question about disclosure, which you just referenced, about more people watching it now. I'm very keen to know what life Disclosure has had since it was made. You mentioned that it was being watched even more now. It's even more relevant now because of its themes of sexual harassment and accusation.
Yeah. The only reason actually is because, you see, what people don't realize is that films get relicensed. And the whole business of the selling of movies is that movies are licensed for a certain number of years, sometimes up to 25 years. And then once that 25-year period is over, then they're able to relicense it again. And of course, I think the story of Disclosure is that, of course, this film has now been relicensed and we've got more platforms than we ever had. You know, that's one thing I think that's fascinating is whether it's Schindler's List or White Squall or Disclosure or Cliffhanger, in those days it was out in the theaters around the world. It might have gone on to VHS and then, of course, DVD, but that was the end of it to a certain extent. And then it would maybe turn up on television. And, you know, Hook, for example, here's another one with a life, had terrible reviews when it came out. And it's now watched more than E.T. and, of course, is a staple for Christmas. But you'd see it on television now with the proliferation of these platforms that, thankfully, I can now use to get my film out in a pandemic and not have to rely on a cinema release. That means that we are able, at the click of a button, to go, oh, I really want to say, oh, yes, you know, we can actually research. We can look for things that are 30 years old and we can find them. And that is totally new. And I think that is a wonderful thing about digital. So Disclosure, which, yes, had its own little life at the time. And, of course, it's a Michael Crichton novel. He also wrote Jurassic Park and is about sexual harassment, of course, from the point of view of a woman harassing a man, which, of course, in the 90s we thought was, extremely risque. And also is in the tradition of these female-led stories where, of course, the woman inevitably is going to get a comeuppance. She's got a shit love life. So it's just great that we can see that and see it in another context. But how I got the role, bloody lucky. I, of course, had done, Hook and Cliffhanger. And at that point, I was on the Good Housekeeping list of approval. I had realized that I needed to be doing an American accent and to learn how to do one, because a lot of people who went to the States at that point just basically said, oh, well, I do my accent and that's it. And I just thought, well, you're kind of taking yourself out of 90% of the roles. And actually, they'd seen me for Basic Instinct. This is hilarious. I've never told anybody. And I got really, really close to Basic Instinct. And I think as a result of that, they then thought, oh, she could be quite interesting for this other role. And of course, I'm playing the wife. So I'd already played the wife in Hook. so, I was also completely right on that list as well. And I think Anne Archer at the time was probably busy because I had that whole row of movies where I just played the wife of all these superstars. I started running out of superstars to be wives to.
That's extraordinary.
Is that an answer?
Yeah. So, are you talking about Basic Instinct or are you talking about Fatal Attraction?
Basic Instinct.
The Sharon Stone film.
Yeah.
You're saying that you nearly got the Sharon Stone role?
I was certainly in the mix. Yes, I was.
Well, that would have been an interesting landmark for you. But,
I just wasn't very good at crossing my legs, obviously, in the audition.
But just quickly at that, time, you you had the attitude that if you want to make it in America, you have to play the game. You have to put on an American accent. You have to do it convincingly, and you have to go in full throttle. Whereas other actresses were saying, "Look, I'm British, and that's me, and take me or leave me." And you said, "Look, you can think of it as a compromise, but it's actually going to advance your career if you do, if you know what the rules are and you play the game."
Well, yeah, and I think that might have been the Australian in me as well. I mean, when I went to Australia, they'd say things like, well, can you lose your accent and just be more Australian? And I'd say, well, actually, to a certain extent, I have to kind of, I can't peel away that British accent I've been born with and then, find the Australian underneath. I'm going to have to, stick it on top a little bit, even though my vowels tend to be pretty flat. And so I was used to doing accents, and in America it was the same thing. But really, it was very hard actually in those days to get an interview unless you just walked straight in with an American accent and you winged it. And I found that the moment they knew that you weren't from the United States, they'd start listening. And the O is always the big thing. The Americans have a very round O. It's an O. And the English and even the Australians have an O. I mean, it's more an O. So, yeah, you had to work quite hard at it. And actually, I have to say, I think my accent in Disclosure is fantastic. But that was partly because they were very nice and they allowed me to have a coach on set every day. And then after a while, they'd say, no, we don't have any money and you can't have one. And then you find you're working in Prague with a whole bunch of Brits as well, who, kind of moving the lights around. And, only about 3 Americans. Suddenly it's like, whoops. But I also think that things have changed. In the 90s, I think what people don't realize is that when I started making films in the early 90s, 70% of the world market was American and 30% was international. It's flipped. So I would say now 75% is international, where they, actually get their money from, and 25% is American. And that's why you've seen this great opening up in the way of America, and this, they're open now to, films that aren't in their language and, which have subtitles, and to Spanish language and to more European films. And that's just purely the way the market has been moving. So all these things have kind of a reason behind them. There's often a sociological and political reason, and quite often it's just purely finance.
Can you just give us a quick remark about Cliffhanger? There weren't a lot of females with automatic weapons back in the early 90s. There were, of course, a couple of prominent action females with Terminator and Terminator 2 and so on, but again, Carolyn, you were kind of really out there. You played John Lithgow's cake baking girlfriend, who also knew how to handle a machine gun.
Airplane flying. I wrote that line, incidentally, about Baker Cake.
Are you joking?
I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
Thelma and Louise had actually just come out. Which was a great big stonking line in the sand, even though, directed by wonderful Ridley Scott, who I also work with, for women's empowerment or liberation, whatever you want to call it. And I have this line in this action movie where, in fact, she barely speaks. And I remember when my agent gave it to me, and he said, look, you don't have a lot to do. But I said, yes, but I am one of the 2 women, and I die on page 90. So I'm really in it. And I fly the plane. I was mad keen to be dressed in leather and to be in an action movie. You have no idea. But anyway, we get to this point, and he says, you'll make someone a fine wife one day. And there I am packing the plastic explosive, and I'm looking all kind of tough, and I've got a gun. And I thought, I have to have a comeback to this. And I said to Rennie Harlin, I said, I need to say something. And he said, like what? And I said, you should see me bake a cake. And he said, I don't get that reference. And I said, heating reference to the bomb and things. I said, look, just let me try it. And of course, we've got a blizzard coming in, and he's worried about so many other things and helicopters and everything else. And because that's what action movies are. I just did an action movie recently, and honestly, the things that are blowing up all around you while you're trying to say 3 lines is hilarious. So I just thought, I've just got my moment, and I had my knife, and I just made sure that it just clicked beside my face, and I just said, absolutely deadpan, you should see me bake a cake. And it stayed in the movie, and it's actually one of those, on the old laser disc, it's actually one of those intros, chapter 13, you should see me bake a cake. So there you go. But no, there weren't too many laughs in that. We had to find them.
Absolutely justifiable pride. And congratulations on being the author of a very quotable quote. Author of a very quotable quote. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it brought the house down.
Yeah. Now, in Hunter Killer, you did play a female president. Glenn Close only came as close as vice president in Air Force One. But in Hunter Killer, you took the next step and you were playing president. What was...
I know, because we really thought that Hillary was going to win, because we shot it in, 2016, just before the election. And so I did try and model myself on her, and I had a wig that wasn't too different and, sort of bulked up a bit. But so we were awfully disappointed. Yeah, that was just a lot of fun. Working with Gary Oldman, who I'd not seen for many years, was just fantastic. He's just extraordinary. And that was really cool. But funnily enough, I actually seem to have cornered a market in political women. I have played I've played floaters, and in a movie called Chasing Liberty, a comedy. I've played the Prime Minister of England. I've played a few queens and duchesses in my time, so it's great because they're all kind of quite strong and bossy, and I do things and make decisions and occasionally kill people, which is really fun. So long may they last. So yes, as you get older, you either get the witch or you get grandma, or you get the kind of the woman in charge who, of course, is going to just mess up everyone else's life, and that is by far the best part.
You mentioned that you're only in a few scenes in the film, but Carolyn Goodall, you play his wife, and you're the one who disciplines him. You're the one who says, I'd never want a maitre d' to mistake me for anyone other than your wife. I'm paraphrasing there. So I guess it's one of the skills of an actor to get the most out of what little they've been given, or if they have a small role, to make it memorable. You made your scenes very memorable in that film.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, as they say, there's no small parts, there's only small actors. Stephen also is such a wonderful filmmaker, and you only make a mark because the director has decided that he's going to shoot you a certain way and he's going to give you the air to breathe to be able to be that person. And if you see those scenes, and I think there's quite a few actually, because of course she's in all the sort of third act of the film. She's in the factory, but those ones, that the moment where she comes and she meets him, are incredibly important for also his emotional journey and where he's going. And there's this very big scene where, in fact, Steve Zalian really places who he is in that point in Act One that we're going to see where he goes. And she says to him, where they're dancing, there's something different about you. What is it? And you're successful, and you're just changed. And he just says, war. And you see this man who is so excited by the fact that he's in a way found his path to what he desperately wanted, that was success. And that's the thing that first guides him. And then gradually, of course, he realizes that it's more than that, and that he also has to beat the system as well, and that he has to save these people's lives. And he was such a conflicted character. And she, of course, sadly, we didn't know enough about her because she was a real force in helping save all the Schindler workers. She really, really was. And when he was researching the book, she refused to speak to him. So there was a lot of hearsay about her. So in a way, I'm kind of sad that she didn't get a bit more of a look in, as history deserved. But I think in terms of the storytelling, the reason that character resonates as well is just because this is, in terms of the story and what the director was doing and the way he was shooting it, gave the gravitas and the time and the space on screen for her to be who she was and to live.
You did meet
so
her,
I'm
didn't
really
you?
grateful for that.
You did meet her.
I did meet her.
Because you were in the film together at the end. What was she like?
Yeah, Stephen did something. She was wonderful. She only spoke German or Spanish, so it was tricky sort of talking to her. She was so overwhelmed. She'd been flown in from Buenos Aires and saw people who she hadn't seen in years. She'd stayed very close, ironically, to Schindler's last lover. They were best friends. And she was thrilled to see her because she lived in New York and had actually married what is known as a Schindler Jew. So it was all very, very interesting. You know, the backstories are so fascinating, people's lives. And we had this big party at the King David Hotel. And to be honest, everybody got really rather drunk. Everyone got a little tipsy that night at the party. And so the next day she was in a wheelchair, whereas in fact she hadn't been. But I think they just felt it was better because it was very, very hot and we were going to have a long time to wait to do this scene. And I think they just thought it was better for her to be kept comfortable. And she was quite thrilled for that. Okay. She was in her early 80s and she died soon after.
What is your reaction to the recent announcement by the Academy Awards regarding the eligibility rules for Best Film? Is it a good idea to impose diversity quotas on film productions? Or is it trying to force something that's actually happening on its own?
I think it's an interesting one. It's happened in the UK as well. In fact, I have just finished the application for BAFTA for our film because we had to do the diversity guidelines as well and put in an application. And it's really intense. Now, of course, I was fine because I insisted that we had a lot of women at the top and that we had gender parity. And in fact, we come in like 60-40. And also in terms of the casting and in terms of the subject matter of the film. I think they're guidelines more than anything, but I do think we do need to make people aware that, business as usual can't continue. And I don't know, war movies, I guess, sell very well, but do we have to have so many of them? There's so many other brilliant subjects that we can write about and talk about. I mean, the trial of Chicago 7, for example, is a great example. So I think the industry actually has to take a good long look at itself as well as to this. We've always thought that 18 to 24-year-old males were what the audience were for years, and these things become set in stone until you say that's rubbish. And the only reason 18 to 24 males went away was because we realized that they were all behind a video game. But we can now look into demographics in a way that we couldn't before. Before it was just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck and lowest common denominator. And now, because of the way that we consume entertainment, we can actually look at niche marketing and we can say, look, there's a very good market for that over there and we will make money, and let's tailor our budget accordingly. And also things are going out globally now as well. So we're not just saying, well, it's got to be English language and it's got to be, aimed at these people, because otherwise you're not going to have the return you want. I would say the main problem with all of this is that we do have large markets that do not agree. And I'm talking Asia. I think China, those are markets that are increasingly big, and that's why the Hollywood blockbusters aim their big action movies there and the big tent poles, because those big territories that do provide a lot of money aren't necessarily up there in the diversity stakes. But maybe they will start being so. Someone has to take the lead. So I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. No, I don't. I don't think it's too woke at all.
Now, actors, when they're asked, why do you do it, often say that they just want to achieve a better understanding of life and of people. Is that the case with you, Carolyn Goodall? And if so, what has acting taught you about people and about life? Have you come to any conclusions yet?
Curiosity and compassion. I think we're really lucky to do our job. We're able to push all the trauma and, the daily demands of life we're allowed to place into our work. People do call acting, it's not just pretending. It really isn't. It is about digging down deep and trying to kind of pull the onion layers off to your own psyche and to other people's psyches, I think. And the great thing is that you're just able to get a kind of little taster of what everybody else does, because you're asked to be a doctor or a lawyer or a stockbroker or, an activist or a president. And inevitably there comes a lot of research with all of that. So that's really, really fun. And actually, I've always been a secret historian as well. History is just my great love. And so that allows me as well to be able to dig and get paid to do the reading and the research that I just really enjoy. And so, yeah, I think it's true in a way, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that other jobs don't allow that too. But yeah, I think we're all a bit barmy as well. So I think it sort of helps our mental health because, you're allowed to scream. You're given a rehearsal, you're allowed to lose it, so all those emotions can bubble to the surface and you can say, oh, no, I'm just using them.